6, 5, you are live.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Cycle 2016. This is our last session of the day for today, Wednesday. And I have to say, this is maybe sort of an inside joke, maybe you won't understand, but I have to say this because for years I have complained about people who schedule me to speak after Rick Rule at conferences because he's so devastatingly logical and he's so persuasive that just being the next guy after him, it's a really hard act to follow. Who was that bastard who scheduled me after Rick Rule? Oh, it's me. So this time I can't complain. But besides making jokes and complaining, I'm very good at complaining sometimes. There's actually a point here. If you're just tuning in now, I highly encourage you to go back when you have time and click on the previous link for Rick's talk, because he covered a fair amount of the ground that I had intended to cover today. So I'm going to sort of make up this talk on the fly a bit and shortcut some of the things. He made a powerful case for why going into business, why the pursuit of wealth is in fact a great way to do the greatest good for the greatest number. And that's kind of abstract, that's kind of technical, if you will. Actually, Rick's talk was very technical. So what I think is we have division of labor here. Rick gave a very persuasive, technical, economically accurate argument for why this is the case. I'm going to try to tell some stories to make it real. Some of you here have heard some of these Papa Lobo stories before. Some of you who tuned in before have heard one of them or part of them. But it's a very, very critical point that I'm trying to make. And usually when I have this talk, I start out by asking, this is a very biased and not very large audience, but let's just go ahead and go through the exercise. And I want to ask the people who are watching online, even if you watch this later at home, a month from now, go through the thought exercise with me, if you will. So show of hands, how many people want to be rich? Okay, I have totally polluted this audience because every single hand is up. Normally when I ask that question, you know, maybe most of the hands will go up. A lot of the hands will go up, but maybe not most. There's a lot of people who I'll say, okay, the next question is, how many of you people don't really care about being rich, but you just want to have enough money to be comfortable, take care of your families, to be okay? You know, these are, I guess they're not. So we had
the first step, the second one.
Okay. And by the way, you're welcome to jump into this conversation anytime you want. So usually this gets either half or most of the hands. Most people don't actually think about becoming rich. If they may, in an honest moment, actually think that they want to, but they don't think they can. So if you ask them, do you want to be rich? The protective mechanism, no, I don't care about that, defends them from failing at it. And then I will ask, how many of you want to be poor? And often in a large crowd, there will be one guy or gal somewhere at the back who put up their hand. And that may seem kind of crazy, who wants to be poor? But I think it's a definitional thing. What they're thinking is, there's more important things than money. I want to have a spiritually rich life. You know, I could be Mother Teresa and be happy. And you know, maybe that's true for people, that they could be sincerely happy. But I don't think that is true or realistic for the vast majority of our species. It's certainly not a way to plan a life or a society. But I asked this question because a lot of people will not raise their hand for the how many want to be rich. And I told a story briefly that I will just briefly touch on again before, about how there was a time in my life where I was working in a nonprofit organization, and my main job was really to raise money, and I would go and have lunch with the donors, and I was in the city of Chicago. There was a half a dozen of them who were very wealthy, and they were our primary supporters. And I'd go have lunch and talk to them, we talk, and then I'd ask them for a check. And then I'd leave with the check in my pocket, or with a good lunch in my tummy, sometimes both. And what I found in talking to these people was that they were all really interesting, that they all had incredible stories of their own, and that I liked them. They were cool. They were neat guys. They were basically good people. And this surprised me. I was just talking with Grace before this talk about a similar experience she had. And think about that for a moment. It surprised me. What does that mean? Why should it surprise me? I have for decades before this I've been an advocate of free enterprise, capitalism. How can I be a champion of capitalism and be surprised that capitalists, real capitalists, might actually not be dirty, rotten bastards? And this realization, I just had a singular moment in my head where I realized I was surprised, and it smacked me like, wow, what does that mean? And I started asking myself, what does that mean? And what I realized is it meant I had a bad attitude about money. I had a judgment, a prejudice. I pride myself on being a rational person. I'm skeptical. I ask myself questions. I challenge myself. I don't want to be a prejudiced person. But I realized that I had a prejudice about rich people. Like the bumper sticker says, you know, rich people are in America. There's another one. I had never agreed with this consciously, but when I encountered real rich people, and I felt this emotion of surprise that they were actually nice or interesting or even good human beings, I understood that I had a prejudice. And when I confronted that prejudice in myself, it was one of those moments where everything seems to fall in place. Maybe a super-saturated solution. Certainly the ideas of capitalism were in my head. And then I had this experience and I decided, okay, I'm not going to be that way. And suddenly that opened up all kinds of possibilities. The main one being that I decided, well, if they can do that, I can do that. I met all these people, and arrogant as I am, I didn't think any of them were smarter than I was or more creative than I was, but they had in fact created things I had not, valuable things that the market had rewarded them with very large amounts of money for. I mentioned as one example the one guy who noticed trading patterns on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and he developed a trading program to take advantage of these patterns, and he sold it to Goldman Sachs for $125 million. Yuri, I think you should work on this plan with your stochastic algorithms. You know, he created something that was very valuable. Yeah, he sold it for a lot of money, but obviously the buyers were happy to pay that and ready to make even more money from that. And he went on to create something else afterwards. So this may still sound theoretical, but where the rubber meets the road here, and this may sound like a happy, all I can say to that accusation is that this is a true. I had this experience, I had the realization, I made a decision to change my attitude, and that opened up the possibility of I want to learn about money. And my goals were always bigger than money, deeper than money. I wanted to save the world. I still want to do that. But it was inefficient, or not fun at least, to go around asking people for money all the time. I thought, well, if I have lots of money, I won't have to ask for it. I'll just do it. So I decided I was going to get serious about money. I didn't know how. I didn't know anything. I'd never owned a stock or a bond. I'd never made any kind of investment other than putting money in the bank, which is not really much of an investment. I didn't know what warrants were, options, none of this stuff. But I just decided, okay, I'm not stupid. I can do this too. I can learn this, and I can create something of value. And the decision itself happened at a disastrous time in my life where I had no money. My business was in huge crisis. I quit. I had 5 children, and I had no business plan. I had no idea what I was going to do next. But I made this decision. I was getting serious about money, and at the same time, I had this crisis in my life, and it was like an emergency situation. But what happened is less than 2 months later, Doug Casey and his partner, David Galland, offered me the job that basically is the job I have now at Casey Research. Now, I don't believe that the universe is the magical genie from that silly video, The Secret, that listened to my need and it gave me what I needed. I don't believe in that. But it is absolutely true that, A, I got the job offer after I made this decision, almost immediately after I made this decision on a life scale. And I believe it is true. I believe I can look you in the eye and honestly say that if Casey had offered me that job before my attitude shift, before I changed my mind, I wouldn't have taken it. I was busy saving the world. I felt really good about the nonprofit work I was doing. I was, fighting the bad guys. I was advancing good ideas. I was Don Quixote charging at the windmill. It didn't matter if I won or lost. I was doing something noble and good in the world. And that really paid me spiritually, as it were. But my nonprofit work was very non-profitable, and I endured that non-profitability for a long time because it felt good. Oddly enough, maybe I'm a master secret or something. But so what I'm telling you is this is my self-analysis. I honestly believe, even though they offered me more money than I ever made before in my life, I would have turned it down. That's not who I was. I wasn't a financial writer. I was Don Quixote. I was championing freedom against the state. You talk about windmills to charge at. Boy, they hurt. So I had an attitude shift. I made a decision, and the opportunity was there. Now, maybe the opportunity could have taken longer, but the point is that without the attitude shift, the opportunity wouldn't have been an opportunity. I wouldn't have taken it. There's two very significant things about this. One is that there are opportunities around us, and the other is that the attitude shift comes first. And when I talk about money, I often tell people, and I'll tell it to you now, and I'll tell it to you again, and you'll hear it many times. To me, wealth is not the money I have in the bank. To me, wealth is not the number of houses, cars, or whatever. To me, wealth is an attitude. And Doug Casey, my boss, he's told me many times, and I've heard this from other places, there are times when I'm broke. There's times when I have no money, I'm broke, but I've never been poor. There's a difference between not having cash right now and being poor. And I think the attitude is everything. Doug likes to say that if you dropped him in Africa, naked in the middle of the continent, by the time he walked to the coast, he would be rich again. And he's got a lot of busted hips and problems. I'm not sure he'd make it to the coast walking right now. But the attitude is there, and I believe he could do that. And you go to places as an outsider, you see the opportunities, you see things that we've been talking about here, you see value you can create, you can deliver. And if your attitude is such, it doesn't matter whether you have starting capital or not. We've talked about stories already here, you'll probably hear more when we're done, about people who were able to make money even though they had no money to start with. We talked about that in Business 101. So the attitude is everything. Now, having established that, and anybody have any questions? Am I wrong? You disagree? You people online, you can write in now. If you're with me on that the key to wealth is attitude. Let me give you some reasons for an attitude shift. I mean, I had my own attitude shift. I met these people, they impressed me. And my heart changed, as it were, like the Grinch before Christmas. My heart grew 10 times in a funny financial way. But let me give you some arguments for why this is important to consider an attitude shift if you don't already value money and wealth the way I do. One is basically what Rick Rule was just saying. There's a very good argument to be made that the act of business itself, the act of commerce, the act of creating value, putting it on the marketplace and getting value in exchange for that adds wealth for everybody. It's an imperfect system. There are problems, there are liars, there are cheats out there. The economy isn't a perfect machine, but it is the best one ever discovered for creating wealth and prosperity for everybody. So if you have the heart of Mother Teresa and you want to help the most number of people possible, not just the poor children on this little street here in Mumbai or whatever, but all the little children in all the world, you'll be a much more effective Mother Teresa if you become Mother Rule Teresa and you go into business and you create value for the world. That's not a joke. I absolutely mean that. If people ask me who has done more good for the world, Rick Rule or Mother Teresa, I would without hesitation say Rick Rule. And that's not a rhetorical flourish or a dramatic pose. I honestly believe that. I mean, she was very sweet, very nice lady. She meant well, but how much did she really change? Okay, some individual lives, she changed a lot. But Rick's activity of bringing material wealth to the world has literally touched millions of people around the planet and improved their lives in a material way.
Yeah, if you want to feed a fisherman, you need to not give him a fish, but an instrument.
Right. So that Yuri's bringing up the concept of, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for life. this is exactly my comparison. Very good analogy from Mother Teresa to Rick Rule. So this is argument number one. Even if you don't actually care about money, money isn't everything to you, you're nicer than that. Again, I sincerely believe if you have the heart of Mother Teresa, you will achieve your goals better by becoming like Rick Rule than becoming like her. So that's argument number one. Argument number two is capital itself is a requirement for doing great things. I have told the story before, and maybe some of you remember it, maybe some of you don't, but if you've seen the movie Contact, it's about space aliens. They beam down instructions to Earth to build a machine to have contact with the aliens. And the point that I want to make, though, is that there's a whole story, and it's a fun story. The government builds this machine, and of course, it'll process, and in the end, the machine falls apart. Somebody dies. It's a big mess. But then it turns out that a consortium, includes also the Japanese government, but some very wealthy individuals, have built another machine. And this one works, and they get to contact the aliens and so on. That takes a lot of money. If you're going to build a gigantic spaceship or the Hoover Dam, or you're going to deploy, like Google wants to deploy the internet all over Africa, and they're talking about floating balloons or blimps or satellites or microsatellites all over Africa. These things take a lot of money. And isn't it great that Google has that kind of capital to be able to think? I mean, think about this. If you were going to go to the United Nations and say, well, these poor Africans don't have access to high bandwidth internet and they're being held back, and we want to help these poor people. You know, the political process, the nightmare you'd have to go through to get this approved. And then even if you got the money, you'd have to tax everybody in all the rich countries, and they'll resist. You know, and even if you get the money out of them, you know that these African dictators are going to take most of the money and build a gold toilet and a gold swimming pool and diamond-studded cars and all this crap. That's a technical economic term. And very little of the money will get to actually doing what it's supposed to do. That's the political process. But if you're Google, you can just do it. Right? And there's another similar story. Bill Gates' foundation has lots of money, and they were trying to help with malaria vaccination in Africa. And there was, they were helping, and the budgets were enormous. The UN didn't have the money. And there was arguments about how to, who to give inoculations to, who to help, and so on. And Bill Gates said, well, how much would it cost to just inoculate everybody? And they're like, $400 million. Okay, let's do it. So what I'm saying is there are some things, great things that are worth doing, important projects. These can be for-profit or non-profit. There are deeds of great renown, the sort of things that poets will be singing about for thousands of years. These are worthy of doing. They're worthy goals, worthy projects, and they need capital. And if you go through the political process, you diminish your odds of success and you maximize your odds of corruption of the project. Whatever your vision is, by the time you get it approved by the politicians, you're not likely to get what you wanted at the end of it. But if you got the money, you just do it. And this camp here, Trakai Cycle Camp, is an example of that. When nonprofit asking people for money, this. And it was heartbreaking when I knew that there were hundreds of students around that were applying for visas or travel money to come to a place like this. And I'd ask the donors, and they'd say, well, I had a bad year, or the markets were down, or whatever, and they didn't give you the money, and there wasn't enough money. It hurt my feelings to go around asking people for money and have them say no. I understood, it's their money. But then after I started working for Doug Casey, and I made that decision that I was going to get serious about money, I started having more money. What a strange thing. And in 2008, when the crash happened, and Virgis, who'd been doing these Trakai camps since 1993, right after the Berlin Wall came down, he asked me to help. And instead of having to go raise money from others, I just said, well, how much would it cost? I could just do it. So there's a teleological argument here. There are important goals that require capital. And to accumulate capital is therefore a good thing to achieve these goals. Now, the means don't justify the ends, but it just so happens that these ends are moral. And so this goes back to, I think, the most fundamental argument about money and why you should not have a bad attitude about money. And it's great that if the pursuit of money enables you to do wonderful things like Mother Teresa, that's good. And it's great that if the pursuit of accumulating capital enables you to build a spaceship or other incredible things and help all of humanity, that's great too. But if all you don't want to build a spaceship, or you don't want to save little children in Mumbai, you just want to get filthy, stinking rich, that's not either. Because how do you filthy, stinking rich? This is for non-Americans. If you want to get super, super rich, we call it filthy, stinking rich. And what does that tell us about our attitudes about money? I like to use this expression because it reminds me of this whole attitude problem that people have about money. So how do you get filthy, stinking rich? Well, you could try to be a criminal and take it from people, but that's a dangerous path. It's laden with conflict. You can be a politician, which is just another kind of criminal who takes the money from people through distributed means. But that's a conflict-laden path, and it's hard to hold on to that. You can end up like Muammar Gaddafi. You know, he thought he was king of the world. How did he end up? That was ugly. Or you can create value and give it to the world and get paid for that. This is a fundamentally ethical process. You can call it greedy, you can say that your motives aren't pure, you can call it whatever you want. But when I create value, I write something that people want to read, or I build something that people want to buy, I am, with my own free will, my own energy, my own mind, my own creativity, I am making something, I am creating value. And I offer it in free exchange. It's a key word, it's free exchange. I don't point a gun at Evolas and say, Evolas, you will buy my writing. No, that doesn't work. I write it, and if he likes it, if he values my writing more than the 30 euros in his pocket or whatever, then he gives me the euros, I give him the writing, and we both feel like we're better off. This is a fundamentally ethical process. Nobody's been coerced, nobody's been harmed, nobody's been wronged. And it creates value, it creates more value. So I think that the pursuit of wealth, the valuing of money, the having a good attitude about money serves the greater social good. But I also think that if all you cared about was making money and nothing else, that would not be a bad thing either. Because the most efficient way to make the most money is actually to serve the largest number of people. And Rick mentioned in his talk in very specific technical terms the value added that the energy companies brought to the world. I'd like to put this more in story form and try to make it a little more concrete. Before the evil robber barons like Rockefeller changed the world with petroleum, you know, how did we get our oil? We had to get in wooden boats and chase whales around the ocean. How efficient is that? Not, right? You have to, A, kill these creatures. B, they don't want to be killed, right? You got to find them, you got to chase them around. You know, Moby Dick comes and sinks your ship. It's a big pain in the butt. It's expensive. It was smelly. The oil, it was not efficient. And because it was so inefficient, it was expensive. The lamp oil was an expense. And so when the sun went down, people might burn the lamps for a little while they finished the dishes or whatever they did, but they went to bed because the sun went down. It was expensive to keep lights on. But after the petroleum revolution, energy was made so cheap. Kerosene became the lamp oil of choice instead of whale oil. And it was so cheap that people could leave lamps burning all night. They could stay up late thinking, planning a new idea, creating a new venture. The Industrial Revolution is credited with an explosion of wealth around the world. But the Industrial Revolution is not one thing. It has many parts. And in my opinion, one of the great parts that enabled this explosion of wealth and prosperity around the world was the shift of energy, contained portable energy from whale oil to petroleum from the ground. And I mean, this is literally like Prometheus, bringing the fire from the gods and lighting the world for everybody. Now, Rockefeller didn't do it out of Mother Teresa-style love for his fellow man. He did it to make money. He understood that if people are paying $1 a gallon for whale oil and he can sell them kerosene for 5 cents a gallon, that he would sell a lot of kerosene. And if it only cost him 2 cents to make it, he'd make a lot of money. That was the motivation. And that was okay, because he offered a value. And people were better off. And I mentioned this in my first talk. The wealth you accumulate is a measure of your service to your fellow man and woman. Unless you're a thief, whether it's a direct thief with a gun, or whether it's a political thief using the machinery of the state to bring wealth your way, unless you're a thief, the way you get filthy, stinking rich, the way you maximize your wealth is maximize the people. And this ties into our, what did I say was the key? What makes for good business? Guys, remember? Scalability. It's okay, it's late, it's dinner time here. These guys are very polite to even be in the room at all. There's beer outside and barbecue. Scalability. This is exactly what I'm saying. Your wealth is a measure, Rick put it in terms of utility, but I think of it in terms of service. The more value you create and you deliver to the world, the more money will flow back to you. And I find this very ironic, because my intellectual opposites, the so-called bleeding hearts of the world, they think, cold-hearted capitalists, you don't care about the other people. But it is in my self-interest. And I can achieve their goals more efficiently than they can by pursuing my self-interest and serving my fellow man, even if all I care about is making money. And what about these, evil robber barons, and they cheat or they steal or they create monopolies? This is a larger conversation than we need to get into right now. But I would just submit as food for thought that most of these problems are actually not products of capitalism or free enterprise, or the voluntary exchange of goods and services. These are problems, distortions in the marketplace created by government. I mean, the only way to get a real monopoly is to get force to stop competitors. And the only way you can really reliably get force is to get the government on your side. And because if your monopoly is just that you make a really good product, it only lasts as long as somebody doesn't make a better product. And the only way you can stop that competitor with a better product is to either get better yourself or use force. So I just don't believe most of these arguments have any basis in truth at all. And this is hard for people to believe. I've made 3 theoretical why you should not help. But this still is, if they don't have that experience like I had, that changed my heart in a day, as it were. It's hard, and I don't blame you. If you're feeling this way yourself, or any of you here in the room are feeling this way, I don't blame you, because there's actually good reason for this. Historically, who were the rich people in the world? Until the 20th century, really, the rich people were, the powerful people were the royalty, the lords and ladies, the people in government, in other words. There was no difference between these brutal bastards who would hold the people down and extract money by force from them, and the people who had the wealth to build the palaces and so on. In history, this was the way, and this is true in the Orient or anywhere too. That's the reality. So there's a reason, there's a long-standing cultural reason why we have this bias. So I can't make you change your mind. I don't want to make anybody do anything. I want to invite you to consider, to ask yourself, to seriously ask yourself, what is my attitude about money? How do I feel about it? Sit down in a quiet room, think about it. Imagine, would there be something about that makes you uncomfortable? If you picture yourself in a swimming pool full of money and you feel something dirty about that, or you feel embarrassed, you need to ask yourself why. Now, I've never done this, and I'm not sure I would, because you know those dollar bills that go through people's hands. Maybe if you could get new ones directly from the bin with no germs on them or something. But no, if your instant response to the thought of being super rich is, ooh, wait a minute, if there's anything other than, yeah, you have an attitude issue that you need to ask yourself about. And I hope that the arguments that I've given you and the points that I've made about the history will help you deal with this. I can't do this for you. I can only encourage you to think about it. So this is the heart of my Money 101 talk. We talked about business, and before you can get into business, before you can really throw yourself into making money, to earning money, to creating value, you have to get rid of the possibility that you may be sabotaging yourself. If you have a bad attitude about money, you know, you might win the lottery, or you might get lucky, some venture angel comes in and gives you a bunch of money, but you are working with weights and barriers that you've put around yourself that you don't have to have. You sabotage yourself. So I honestly encourage everybody to have these thought experiments. Identify if you have attitude problems about money that I've given you. If that's not enough, write to me. You all know how to reach me. We'll talk about it. But this can be fixed. And this is absolutely, crucially, Money 101, the first step. If you have a good attitude about money, it changes everything. And in my case, again, absolutely true story, attitude shift led within months to an opportunity, or it didn't lead to the opportunity. Opportunities are around all the time. The attitude shift resulted in the next opportunity, changing the world for me. And it made it possible for me to be here today with you. Without the money, the value I've learned to create and give to the world, I would not have met my wife. There are so many wonderful things in my life that I would not have. And that's basically my point. And I encourage everybody, if you haven't done it yet, do this exercise, introspect, think about your attitudes, because it is absolutely the single most important thing you can do regarding money. Thank you very much. So if anybody wants to run away to the barbecue, you can. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them. This was not part of my talk, but I do have one more thing that I want to add. You're welcome to leave, that's fine. But I also found something, this is not a fundamental philosophical point, it's not an argument to make, but it's just a little bit more Papa Lobo story. When I was poor, and I was poor, I wasn't just low on cash, I was poor, I was in a rut, and it was difficult for me to even imagine how anything would be different. And I was a single father of 3 children. Life was not calm. You know, I don't believe in the peaceful idiot concept. You know, being poor, it sucked. It was really bad. You know, and it was bad in so many different ways. And you know, there's times where you know, the children are unhappy, or you could do something, but there's no money to do it, or they're bored, and there's no money to go anywhere and do something. So what do? You turn on the electronic babysitter. There's so many things that I wish I could have done differently, or would have done differently. But one example is my children excelled at finding ways of destroying the rental properties that I lived in. I didn't have money to buy a house, so I was always renting. And there were experiments with turning the bathroom into a swimming pool. There were experiments with turning crayons into murals on the walls. There were, we don't need to get into very creative and productive in this. And when you don't have any money and a giant flood of water comes down the stairs from the upstairs bathroom and starts leaking out of the light fixture in the kitchen over the stove while you're making spaghetti. That's a problem. You know, it's one of those moments, right? How am I going to pay to repair all this damage? I didn't have the money. It was a big problem. And then afterwards, post-Casey world, and I had my attitude shift. I got serious about money. I started making more money, started investing money. We've talked about some of the adventures that I've had. There were instances where, something was ruined or broken or whatever. And I could just pay for it. Right? I could just fix it. And that doesn't mean that I let my kids burn the house down all the time. It means that I could have a more calm discussion with them. And we could talk about what was done wrong without, this heart attack moment. Having money changed me as a parent. And it also made life just so much more relaxed and easy. And this, it's kind of funny. People think, oh, money, that just makes you a money-grubbing, evil person in some way. But I honestly believe that having some money, and I'm not super rich, but we're comfortable. And that, in many ways, actually made me a better person. It made me a better father. It made me an easier, calmer person to interact with.
Insurance.
Lots of insurance. Yeah. Do we have any questions? When is the dinner?
We have one reminder.
Okay, question.
Why did Doug offer you that job?
Why did Doug offer me that job? I actually have a very specific answer to that. Doug used to run an annual conference called the Eros Society Conference, not Eros, but Eris, the goddess of discord, which tells you a lot about Doug's psychology. And every year the idea was a different person would be the chair of the conference, find speakers, organize it, and so on. And this way Doug didn't have to do any work. And he got to go to the conference and enjoy the fun of the interesting people that this thing attracted. And in 2004, I was the apple bearer of this conference. And wasn't perfect, but here's the key. I told him I will do A, B, C, and D. And when the conference was all said and done, I delivered A, B, C, and D. That's how I got the job. Now, more specifically, Doug Casey and I had formed Casey Research. Doug was kind of tired of writing the newsletter all the time, all this work it took, and they knew I was a writer. And they're saying, well, who do we know as a writer? Well, they knew several different writers. But when I delivered on time, no complaints, I did what I said I would do, they're like, there's a guy who does what he says he will do, and he's a writer. And I didn't know anything about geology, which is essential to my job. I didn't know anything about finance. I didn't know what a warrant was, like I was just saying. There were people with MBAs who were applying for the position. There were PhDs in geology that were applying for the positions. And they didn't give it to any of them. They gave it to me because I was the kind of guy who would do what I said I would do, obviously a hard worker, all these things, and they figured they could teach me the rest. The content wasn't important. The structure, if you will, was vital. And it turned out that I learned very quickly. And just quick follow-up to that, I talked to David Galland some years later, and I told him, David, I'm eternally grateful to you for taking a chance on me. When you and Doug offered me this job, I was literally on my last 2 quarters to rub together my pocket. And I had no experience in the field, and you guys took a chance on me, and it has changed my life for the better in so many ways. I will always be in your debt. I am your friend, your brother in arms, and thank you so much, and you can count on me in the future for friendship. And he looked at me and he said, I didn't take a chance on you. You were a no-brainer. You were the hardest working, smartest person I'd met in years. There was no question at all that you were the right decision, which was very flattering to me. But it goes to the question of the viewer. I mean, we talked about this also in the business things too. Again, and Skinner, was it Skinner who said skills and experience? He doesn't even look at the education on the resume. Skills and experience. And I have helped people in this room rewrite their CVs. And I always take the education and the red diploma from the top and I put it on the bottom. And I take the job experience, which is an afterthought on page 3, and I put it at the top. Absolutely, as an employer myself in the past, what can you do? What have you shown that you can do in the marketplace? Obviously, coming out of school, that's a bit more of a challenge. But yeah. Any more questions?
Yeah.
You
don't have to answer.
It's okay.
You don't want. So, why was Casey Research sold?
Why was Casey? I guess it's not terribly private. This isn't highly relevant to the topic at hand. But Doug and his partners were no longer getting along. Doug actually made an offer. No, they made an offer to Doug to buy him out, but he wasn't quite ready to move on from the organization with his name on it. So he made a counter offer no negotiations. And what basically happened is a friend of Doug's came and made a third-party offer, and he bought out his partners. Subsequent mergers and so on, but so it happened. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I heard the signal, the dinner bell there. So thank you for participating, for tuning in. Let's go eat and enjoy, and we'll see.
Thank you.